your ability to actually reach across the aisle, reach across whatever silos exist in an organization, and actually get the cross-functional work done to make meaningful change to the business, it's where success is going to lie.
What would happen if we just told the truth?
Welcome to TruthWorks, where we dig into the nitty-gritty of leadership and work.
And what needs to change. I'm Jessica Neal.
And I'm Patty McCord.
Our journey together started in HR, but trust us, it's evolved into something wild, honest, and, well, a bit rebellious.
So throw out the handbook. We're here to redefine rules to work for us, not against us.
Let's dive into another episode. Hello, everyone. We're here with Iain Roberts. Iain currently is the VP of People and Culture at Airbnb. But prior to that, he was the head of design engineering at Dyson. You spent a long part of your career at IDEO in many roles. You were a partner. You were a COO, I think, on your Boomerang tour because you left and came back. You've been an advisor to Allbirds. You went and worked at Ford with Greenfield Labs. And now you're at Airbnb doing a completely different thing than you've done. And, you know, Patty and I did the job that you're now doing at Airbnb. Right. We both did it at Netflix. It's something we love to talk about. So, Iain, before we get started, maybe you can tell folks just a little bit about the background that you grew up in, because you were more like industrial design. And I don't know if everybody knows what IDEO is. Patty and I were big fans of IDEO when we were at Netflix and studied what you all did. But maybe tell us a little bit about where you started, and then we'll talk about where you are now.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks for having me today. I mean, It's a pleasure spending time with you both. Oh my God, way back when, I was one of those nerdy kids that was both art and science, right? Like my A-levels in the UK, like if I go back to when I was 18, which is a long time ago, I was studying art, physics, and mathematics and trying to figure out what do you do with that? And my parents, bless them at the time, really wanted me to go and get a real degree. And so I had that fascination with understanding how things worked and went to get an engineering degree and ended up finding my way to the Royal College of Art and doing industrial design engineering, which kind of brings together the aesthetic and the desirability of actually product design with the engineering and the systems thinking about how to actually get it to work. Right. And so that's kind of the origination story for like the left brain and the right brain working together for me. Worked for Dyson. That was more like finishing school, frankly, coming out of university. And then James honed us all into kind of like people who could actually build products for scale, manufacture them at scale.
But Dyson was like, I don't know, and still is, this thing which like made vacuuming cool. Right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, like everybody wanted a Dyson and you wanted to vacuum. And it was actually a pretty vacuum.
Well, pretty's interesting, right? Because James never wanted to do things the way anybody else had done it, right? And so traditionally in a product development organization, you would have the industrial designers figuring out what something looks like, and then the engineers get given that to figure out what to do with it, how to make it real. James's organization was only one career path if you were in product development. It was called design engineering. And like it was the bringing together of design and engineering into one career. And we designed from the inside out. Right. The reason a Dyson vacuum cleaner looked the way it did is because that's how it needed to look to work the way it worked. And so kind of like very much designed from the inside, no artifice to it, no styling to it, just fundamentally, how does it need to work? And well, that's an honest projection of what the product is and what it does. And so it was a very much like we're going to just turn left. When the whole category is turning right, we're going to turn left. And what we're able to do there was build a product that almost doubled the expected retail price for a vacuum cleaner.
Yeah, they were expensive.
We floated a category for Hoover, for Electrolux, for Miele. Like they loved us, even though we were their worst competition.
Sure, they did. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so I mean, I ended up at IDEO. IDEO, I would say, is a wonderful environment, a wonderful place for some of the most creative brains in the world to come together and solve incredibly hard challenges. Founded by David Kelly and a guy called Bill Mogheridge. Again, kind of interdisciplinary thinking, bringing together engineering, design, but as well as engineering design, ethnography, and a human-centered research perspective as well. And I spent 20 years there. I spent 22 years there.
What does IDEO do for those that don't understand? It's design, but who are your clients? Who do you help?
Yeah, I mean, IDEO started as a product development organization. So earliest client base was working in the Valley, David Kelly working with Steve Jobs, figuring out how to design the first mouse, the first production scale mouse for Apple Computer. So very much the integration of design and engineering, as I've mentioned before in my past. But then over the 22 years I was there, and I'm actually not a boomerang, and I'll explain why I'm not a boomerang in a second.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
We began to take that interdisciplinary approach to just help companies figure out how to grow and how to solve tough problems. And so as the internet era kind of like crashed over us in 2000, and then the mobile era crashed over us again in 2010, we brought those capabilities into the organization. Sustainability and climate action became like critically important to organizations. We brought those capabilities into the organization. So IDEO, I think, helped companies think creatively about solving problems and help them think about how they could grow through building new products, services, and experiences. And my client base had been everything from big tech companies like Google, legacy automotive manufacturers like Ford, through to hospitality category IHG. I worked with IHG over a good decade of my career whilst I was there at IDEO. So just a wonderful experience. But the thing that I think characterizes the first half of my experience at IDEO and then the second half, first half, I was the guy helping companies design the thing. Like whatever that thing was, be it a new internet service or a car or an interface or a service experience for hospitality. And then the second half of my career at IDEO, the second decade, was wrestling with this idea of like, why is it so difficult to get new ideas into the world? Like, why do organizations struggle so much with taking wonderful ideas, great ideas they have for growth, and actually building them into the organization such as the organization can deliver upon them? So I kind of found my way into organizational design through that path, right? Helping companies figure out not just what to design, but actually how to get it out into the world. And that's what took me to Ford. Except I was still an IDEO employee. I went to Ford for 3 years working with Jim Hackett. I was seconded to Ford. I worked directly with Jim at the time to help him build 2 new product development organizations, one called Greenfield Labs, which still exists down the valley in Palo Alto today, and the other called D Ford, which was really a reimagining of design, UX design, and strategy together to help them build new products. Led to the F-150 Lightning and the new Ford Bronco, their connected services division, Ford Pro, a lot of super fascinating stuff that we did together. And that was, the moment where I started to realize my fascination is helping organizations be designed to be fit for their own future. And so that's maybe the path from like systems and how do things work to then elevating it to organizations and how can they be designed themselves to be fit to create their own future.
When we met, you sort of got this call out of the blue from Airbnb, Brian.
Yeah.
And I know in talking to the team there that they were looking for something different. They were, Airbnb really embraces a culture of creativity and wants to foster that through the organization. And so with this head of people role, they wanted someone that could do that. And they stumbled upon you and you get a call from them and you say what?
No.
Exactly. And why? What was your first reaction? No.
I mean, the first time that the team called me here, I was both kind of humbled, right, that an amazing brand like Airbnb would call me, but also perplexed, right, because I was in the COO role at IDEO at the time. I'd done interim head of design roles, head of product roles, done strategy, I'd done marketing. People was the one bit I hadn't done, right, in the executive suite. Is the one challenge I had not no experience of, but I didn't have the formal accreditation that you could expect somebody to be able to have to be successful in this role. They also called me at an odd time where I was deeply committed to the success of IDEO. And so like the no was probably more of a gut reaction in terms of actually why me? And maybe I wasn't curious enough to understand actually why they thought that I would be a good candidate for it. So luckily they called me about a year later again with the same question. And I was kind of like a bit of a no but at that point, right? And I began talking to our CFO at the time, Dave Stevenson. Really what flipped for me was when I met Brian. And as you said, Brian's desire is for this place to be the most creative company in the world. And why creativity? Because creativity, I think, creative problem solving gives us the ability to see opportunities that others don't, and gives us frankly, the courage to take those opportunities that others won't, right? So creativity, this ability to not be satisfied with the status quo and see different ways to do things, is just so inherent to the culture. When Brian and I talked about the role, it was really clear that what he really wanted to do was to have a partner to help him reimagine and redesign the future of the company. Now, when you frame the role and the opportunity for the role in that way, I'm like, okay, I can see the transferable skills at that point, right? And I can see the transferable experiences.
Yeah, if we could all just reframe it that way. I learned everything I know about the people function from product people. Everything. And my whole approach to all of it was, if I was designing a feedback system and I started from scratch, would I ever come up with the annual performance review? Fuck no.
Right.
I mean,
no, yeah, absolutely.
No. But so I love that. I love that. And I've done a bunch of stuff with IDEO over the years too. And it's just, we've always had this mind meld of like, yeah, just start from scratch and see what you can do. So can't wait to hear more.
Thank you, Patty. Yeah.
So you're sort of in the reframing part, and you're like, okay, this is more interesting.
They're wooing him. He's being wooed.
They're wooing you. How did you feel about the HR part, the part you knew about HR? Did you have like a reaction to doing that work? And what was it?
Again, I think that's where the initial gut reaction came from, right? I mean, and then to be clear, I worked deeply with our chief people officer at IDEO, but the two people that worked for me at the time worked directly with me. So I had been in that space. I just hadn't led those teams. Right. It's, again, you could imagine someone coming to me and saying, hey, do you want me to lead HR, or do you want me to actually help you design the company and then bring HR along, bring the people function along to actually enable us to create that change and make it stick, right? And it was really, for me, building enough belief that actually that's what they wanted to do, because that in and of itself is a courageous and out-of-the-box approach to thinking about change, right? And one of the first people I called when I was getting seriously down the pipe in having the conversations with the team at Airbnb was actually Stan McChrystal, the guy from the McChrystal Group, General Stanley McChrystal. He's a friend of mine. And we talked about how creating change can happen from any seat in the leadership team, right? And he's like, there's no reason why you can't help be a catalyst for Brian and help Brian create change from this seat. And if you really believe that he's confident in your ability to do that, and he's actually willing to go on the journey, then it's a tremendous opportunity. And so it was maybe one of those conversations that turned me on from definitely sitting there thinking, is it the right fit for me, to seeing the opportunity and seeing it, frankly, as a design opportunity. You know, since I've left, I've been here 9 months now. Many of my old IDEO colleagues have asked me the question, but are you designing? And it's like, I'm designing every day, and I'm designing every day actually in very familiar ways to me that kind of like feel like actually the COO role at IDEO.
Yeah. I want to dig into this a little bit more, because as you're sort of describing your journey at IDEO and sort of getting into the design of an organization that can deliver change, deliver innovation. Let's talk about that, because this is something that Patty and I love to geek out on, because a lot of companies build and design systems that prohibit those things, right?
Yeah.
So one example is you're growing, you're getting bigger, you put in a bunch of process to try to control the chaos, approvals, this, that, the other. That tends to stifle things and slow things down. What have you learned, not only at IDEO, but in the current role now, in terms of building and designing a product or a system that really does foster this creativity and innovation and allows for people to, make mistakes and innovate and try things they've never tried before?
Or throwing out the infrastructure that everybody else relies on?
Such good questions. I mean, I would say I don't have the answer, right? But I can tell you what I'm learning and what I'm experiencing. One of the things Brian and I talked about is how do we actually hold the entrepreneurial spirit of an early stage startup, like the benefits, the virtues that gives you as an entity, but also balance that with all of the scale that you get from being a Fortune 500 company, right? From being a $9-10 billion revenue company. That for me is the challenge here. Constraints and guardrails are important, right? There's a kind of like a minimum viable set of constraints and systems that we need to have in place that stop us making silly mistakes. And at the same time, there's an environment we need to build and a culture we need to foster that actually really pushes forward with our belief that we want people to experiment, right? We want people to be pushing beyond the edge. And frankly, that's built into our value system here at Airbnb. The idea of being a serial entrepreneur goes back to the very early stages of Brian and Joe and Nate building this company. There's a desire for people to do that in the organization. And so for me, it is always about holding those two ideas in tension, right? Yeah. We don't want chaos and we don't want overly constraint. Now, that doesn't mean that you just vacillate wildly between the two. Ideally, what it means is that you hold those ideas in tension, and integrative thinking would suggest you try and find a third way, right? You try and find a third way.
Yeah, I used to call it discipline. And I learned that from engineers, and people would say this, the classic stereotype of the software engineer, geeky nerd was, these guys don't like any rules. They don't like to be constrained. I'm like, are you kidding? I mean, they call it languages, right? They hate senseless bureaucracy. That's different than having like the infrastructure that gives you the ability to know. It's like you can't think outside the box unless you know where the box is.
Right. Design needs constraints, right? It absolutely needs it. But this is not an act of art. It needs constraints to push up against and sometimes push beyond. And so that's, to me, a lot of the work I've actually been doing in the last 9 months is getting much clearer, or trying to get much clearer, right, around decision space. Right? Actually, who owns what decision space? Because if we can get that really clear, then we get in an environment where people know what their agency and autonomy looks like. And if we can do that, then we can actually provide the environment in which they can take risks beyond one where they're actually just asked to stay in their lane.
Well, let's talk about that for a little bit. I was just talking to a company yesterday, and they've sort of moved from functional structure to more of a matrixed objective, right? Focus, culture, and structure. And it hasn't been clear who's in charge and who's making the decisions. And the structure is quite murky, and people are sort of coming in and out of projects, and it's been kind of a mess. But a decision maker and a leader on things is important, right? Yeah. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've joined at a moment where the organization is maybe landing the transformation from being highly divisional to highly functional from an organizational design perspective. Pre-pandemic, I mean, obviously wasn't here, but the organization grew organically. There are a lot of GMs, and I think the founders would say they felt like they lost a little bit of control over the experience. And if you care about design and you care about customers, then the experience you're trying to deliver is critically important. And so this shift to a functional organization, and I would say that we've got a very pure form of it here at Airbnb, has had tremendous amounts of virtues for us. Because rather than 7 different design teams or 7 different marketing teams, we're organizing around, we want world-class capability in design or marketing or front-end engineering or AI or whatever those critically differentiating capabilities will be for us to win in the marketplace. And having a very, very pure functional structure allows us to really say, we're doing the best work in the world in that discipline, right? Then there's a reason why our experience, our product, our service is well regarded in the marketplace. Now, with it, though, as you know, comes a set of challenges that you need to design against, which is highly functional, means having a minimum number of cross-cutting capabilities that hold those functions together is really important. One of the things we've been building is an enterprise-wide program management function that acts as one of the cross-cutting functions that holds the entire thing together, that they really own and steward the product development process. And within that, we're really clear about who owns what decision at what moment. Now, at the end of the day, though, we're still founder-led. And so the beautiful thing about the functional structure is it's allowed us to have the entire organization rowing in one direction with one company roadmap, where we do 2 releases a year, Right? So the entire company is working on that one roadmap with 2 releases a year. And at the end of the day, where do all those functions connect? It was Brian. Right? And Brian has this remarkable facility to be able to see the system and connect the dots and help organize all of those functions together to be able to architect and pull off this one company roadmap. So it's been quite remarkable for us. And this for sure, learning and development over time, as I said. And we're asking ourselves the questions, what are the other cross-cutting functions that might need to be put in place? But it's been remarkable to see how well it's working at the moment.
I'm just thinking about, well, how many people are you now?
Yeah, we have around 7,000 employees at Airbnb.
Okay. When we hit 8,000 at Netflix, that's when I really, things were just sort of breaking. Right? I was like, oh, this doesn't work anymore. I don't know what it was about 8,000, but the infrastructure started to crack. But so when you do a change like this and you have 7,500 plus people, how do you do that? How do you get everybody marching in same direction?
What walls did you hit and how'd you bust through them?
Well, I mean, I didn't instigate these changes for sure. So I'm certainly part of the delivery mechanism for them.
Yeah.
So at IDEO, we would always talk about you create change through movement, not mandate. But actually, I think what's happened here is both a really healthy amount of both. Right? You've got Brian at the top saying, actually, you know what? We're going to move to one company roadmap and we're going to all march to the beat of one drum and we're going to release product twice a year, which is very different to any other software company.
Yeah.
Right? That's a mandate. And he has the strength of will to be able to make that happen. And that alone isn't enough, right? We need to build the movement that sits underneath that for people to see the benefit in that way of working. I think that's where my team's coming in being able to help those teams organize how their work fits into that way of working and how they can start to see the benefits, the virtues actually of being able to work in that way. And frankly, how it allows us all as an organization. It's remarkable actually to see an organization of this scale working together. It almost feels a little bit like murmuration, right? Of a flock of birds that we're all kind of moving in one direction. It's not dogmatic, but there's a general sense that we're all moving in one direction, which is, I think, part of what we're here to help foster as we allow those functions to move forward.
Oftentimes when you're introducing these new ways of working or mandate change, there's such a resistance to change. Did you experience that?
I'm sure that the team has experienced it, and I'm sure that, again, I'm here 9 months in, and this happened when we kind of made this change a couple of years ago. I firmly believe that people want change, and people struggle to accept the change themselves in terms of what's going to be expected of them. And so the thing I've been telling my team since I joined is any change creates and requires friction. Right. So let's just embrace the fact that as we change, friction is created. And our job, actually, our superpower as a talent organization is actually to be able to navigate that friction and help people see the benefit of the from and to state that we're trying to move through. A lot of this, it would be very easy to land in a PowerPoint deck or a Google Slides deck and say, here's the new XYZ org chart or process. And then the reality is, people need to know why it benefits them. People need to know the purpose and motivation for what the change is going to try and enable. People need to know, actually, what does it mean for me with my day-to-day? And at the end of the day, once you land all of that work, you still need to continue to apply pressure to make it work. So I think we've landed this functional structure at Airbnb, but we have work ahead of us to make sure it's fine-tuned and it works effectively over time. And as we look at the greater number of changes we might bring into the organization over the coming years, all of that work will require us to stick at it, right? More than just deliver it, but stick at it for the year, 2, 3 years after it so that we can actually gain mastery in that way of working. And I think that's part of the challenge.
Yeah. And I think that, a really great skill that we can bring to workers now, not in the future, because I hate conversation about the future because it's here, is change is rapid. It's part of work now. And so the skill of being able to navigate, accept, understand the friction, Right. Know that it's going to make you scared and uncomfortable, and that's okay. Right. That creates adrenaline, and adrenaline's kind of cool. So are you teaching people how to do that? What are the reward and punishment systems that are associated with navigating through change?
Oh my gosh. I don't know that we've got reward and punishment systems in place, right? But there are natural ones that exist, right?
I was going to say, yeah, it doesn't have to be a process or a procedure, but it's already in there. You know, it's there.
Yeah. I mean, as with any change, there's fear. There's fear, I think, for people to wonder, will I be relevant on the other side of this? Right. And I think the opportunity we have is, we've built an organization here that I think allows people to do their best work, but kind of like learn and develop as they're doing their work. And so, so much of actually what we need to do in the next 3 to 4 years in this topic is more about actually how we collaborate together. And that's for me the big learned skill that we're going to need to really double down on. So we used to say at IDEO that we really valued radical collaboration. And I felt at the time that was trite. Right. But actually, now that I come to an organization that is collaborative, that needs to be collaborative, I can see how everything we did was actually building that muscle over time. And so I think the reward system here, frankly, is for people to really begin to see that in this functional structure, these cross-functional teams, primary teams, as we call them here at Airbnb, are where the outcomes happen. Right, your ability to actually reach across the aisle, reach across whatever silos exist in an organization, and actually get the cross-functional work done to make meaningful change to the business, it's where success is going to lie. So much of that will be a new way of working for the team moving forward. And we used to talk about this as T-shaped people at IDEO, which I think is an old McKinsey term, but like looking for that deep expertise as being a world-class expert at the thing you do, but having the empathy, right, to reach across, to understand what the other functions do, what they bring to the table, right? It's such a key thing that's going to be critical for us to actually succeed in building the trust and relationships that we'll need to pull this off. And I think that's part of the opportunity here, because if we don't do that, then I think people will be very much delivering against their functional goals.
Right.
But our functional goals alone don't create the ecosystem that delivers the business value.
Well, I want to talk about that. As I understand it, I think most folks at Airbnb work remotely. Is that true?
Yes, and.
Yes, and. Okay. Yeah. So there's a fair amount of people in the office, and then there's a fair amount of people not in the office. I think this is something that a lot of companies are struggling with, that they have a hybrid or remote workforce, is how do you build collaboration, behavior, and trust, and all of those things when you're not together?
Yeah, for sure. So we launched a program called Live and Work Anywhere back in, I think it was 2022, that allowed people to literally, within reason, like work in where they wanted to work, either in an Airbnb office or remotely at home, right? And we saw tremendous benefits from that program. The reality is that our engagement scores are way up. People are feeling engaged, productive, and feeling like it's really been a solid move forward for them individually in terms of actually how they interact and engage with the organization. We've had some challenges as well, though, right? Some of those challenges around actually belonging, right? How do you feel like you belong to the mission? And then as Brian and I have been getting further into our work together this year, we've been asking the question about, what types of work are better done in person, and what teams and when would those teams need to come into the office more than they currently do today? So really, as we think about it, we've seen tremendous benefits on working remotely. Yes, it's allowed us to access different forms of talent in different markets, which has been really wonderful. And there's work to be done, right? The future for us, I would say, is flexibility, right? It's going to continue to be flexibility for people. We certainly have put an awful lot of effort in the last 9 months, 12 months actually, into how we create intentionality around how we gather.
Yeah.
Right. So building more guardrails, recommendations, toolkits, and systems to help leaders bring their teams together at the right cadence to do a variety of different types of things. Those could be big workshops where we're actually helping leaders align their leadership team around the vision and mission and purpose for the year, kind of more about belonging and like signing up to the mission. as well as this kind of other kind of thing, which Brian and I were talking about around super ambiguous problem solving that's cross-functional. My experience, my belief is it is better done in person. Now, the reality is that's not all work, right? That by no means is all work, and that is not all teams. And so we're beginning to work into when and which teams need to be in person to do that type of work. And so we've got these two forms of gathering for belonging and kind of like alignment and relationship building, and then gathering to work on really ambiguous strategic problems that we actually need to succeed with.
Good for you for doing that exploration. I mean, kudos, because people want to see it black and white.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, can we go back to the way we used to be? No. Right? Is the pandemic model working for everybody? No. Okay,
No.
so, I think we should adopt flexibility instead of hybrid.
Yeah, I like that word better than hybrid.
Yeah.
And I love that you brought up intentionality, because that's what I talk to everybody about. Because I think that there's a couple things going on. You have very senior leaders. They like it when everybody's together, right? It makes them feel good. They like to walk around and say hi to people and whatever. And they kind of want it to go back to the way it was. But what they experience the way that it was not the experience that individuals had, because, that was a very different experience. And so to Patty's point, people have sort of, you got to be back. It's black and white, or we're not, we're just remote first. But to build trust and to collaborate, and when you are together, there should be an intentionality behind it. And we're not going back to the way that we were. We all, I think most of us have recognized that. But the message I always try to get to everybody is like, when you are together, when you're in the office, because the days of just being in the office 9 to 5 and waiting for your boss to leave and then you leave, those days are gone, right? And the monotonous back-to-back one-on-ones, right? Those days are gone. You can do that on Zoom. But when we're together, like, it's a chance to inspire. When we're together, it's a chance to connect. Like, when you ask me to come, like, let's make it special and let's get something out of it, right?
Yeah, I remember an offsite, an executive saying to me, I don't know why the hell we have to do this. I already know all this stuff. I mean, we've talked about it a million times. And I said, newsflash, dude, this isn't for you. The purpose of us getting together is not your education. Hello. It's everybody else. And so, of course, you have to be here so that people can see inside your brain and your intentionality and your function.
Right. Yeah, I mean, so the insight for us really is that flexibility is going to be key. We're going to maintain flexibility. And the work and the team defines the intentionality and the rhythm and the cadence that you need to come together around. So G&A functions have a different experience than our product development functions.
Yeah, I call it heartbeat, right? Yeah, like G&A, right? Every quarter ends at the end of the quarter. Surprise. Month end close comes at the end of the month. Oh my God. Right. Can we be flexible about that? No. Yeah.
But I mean, the thing that we all experience, I certainly experienced this as a leader going through the pandemic, was we took in-person cultures and we exploded them. And we gave our leaders and managers very little tools to be able to figure out actually how to lead in that environment. And my experience actually was that our employees navigated the pandemic much better than our leaders did. Right? Back at IDEO. And for me, then, even with all that work around intentionality around gathering, about why we come together, how we come together, and who we're coming together with for what purpose, we're still going to spend the majority of our time like this digitally. And the thing I believe, Brian believes, is that this is the worst technology is ever going to be. Right. And so we have to put as much energy into the digital employee experience, enabling managers in new ways with new tool sets, new tool stacks, to be able to engage, inspire, connect with, and get the best work out of our employees digitally as well. And that's also got to be part of the future.
Yeah. And I don't know if enough focus is being put on that today.
I learned a lot at the beginning of the pandemic from a friend of mine who is a producer for TED Talks. And she said, everybody's doing it. So, go to a TED conference and there's interstitials and there's music and there's this whole experience that makes you feel like you belong. And I thought, oh, what a great idea. We're producing an experience We're just not replicating being in person.
Right.
Yeah. So I feel like at Airbnb, you have this founding CEO who really cares about these things and wants these things. You had a career, consulting and working with all types of different companies, right? And Patty and I were fortunate enough to work with a founder that's probably cut from the same cloth of Brian, right? Who really is invested and really cares. But when you want change and innovation, if the top isn't interested or invested, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's very hard to have it take shape. So tell us a couple of stories where, outside of Airbnb, when your works with clients, like what were the success stories and what was like a not success story and why?
Absolutely. So I've worked with a lot of CEOs over the last couple of decades. And other than Brian, obviously, the gentleman that stands out is another close friend of mine, a guy called Jim Hackett, who was a CEO for Forward for 3 years. I worked with Jim directly. Jim would always say the CEO's job is to kind of like be at that point where the company meets its future. And I love that framing because it talks about the need for a CEO to be able to hold at least two ideas in tension. And again, you've heard me talk about tension before today, so it's like a common theme for me. And for me, that's both the ability to explore and the ability to optimize. And I think so many CEOs are brought into organizations and are looking for ways to create efficiency. And it's very necessary, frankly, right? You need to be able to create a cost structure of your business that delivers ideally increasingly high margins to the bottom line, for sure, right? But that optimization approach only gets you so far. And you always think about the asymptotic level of growth in an organization. And the thing that Jim did, frankly, better than any CEO I've ever met, is hold those two ideas in tension, understand what it takes to take cost out of a business, frankly, a very capital intensive business, right? As well as set it up for a way of thinking that would enable that organization to continue to explore about what its future would look like. And many of those experiments that we did together at Ford didn't pan out. Actually, I think that's a good thing, right? Because if you can't fail and learn from those failures, then actually I don't think you can breed a long-term path for explorative, innovative success. And so you look at some of the work we did around autonomy, and the autonomy bubble burst, right? And you look at all the work we did around mobility, and the mobility bubble kind of burst. But actually, what actually took off in a lot of our work was the idea of connectivity and how we could build a connected services infrastructure that sits around the car. Right. And so the car moving away from being just the product to almost being like an accessory to the data network.
Mm-hmm. It's like your phone.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So if it wasn't somebody like Jim Hackett's way of thinking, I don't think Ford would have been able to take that leap and then build those next accretive revenue streams, right? The next $1 billion revenue stream that's going to be applied on top of vehicle sales will be connectivity and services. And then that will lead them to another thing and to another thing and to another thing. And I think it is just incredibly hard to be a CEO being tasked with holding those two ideas together, because the early stage ideas always look risky. Mm-hmm. Jim would say you need to hold them like a butterfly in your hand. You need to hold them tightly enough they can't escape, but if you hold them too tightly, you crush them.
Right.
And so actually, how do you do that? That's a very different culture and way of thinking than the optimizing. And again, I'm not saying one's better than the other. Both are necessary.
Yes.
But when a CEO and a leader is able to do that, right, then I think I see something very special happen in an organization. Frankly, where I've seen it be less successful is where design and innovation and all those other words that we might use in the marketplace are almost an accessory to the core way of product development, the core thing that the business does. And so they become like a tax to the system versus actually a new way of thinking, a new way of doing. And so it becomes very easy to ignore that work. That work often gets sequestered off into the side of an organization. I was about to say into the corner of a building, but into the side of an organization where it becomes invisible.
The skunk works.
The skunk works, right? It's the worst model in the world, right?
Right.
And at the end of the day, when quarterly earnings start to go south, the first thing that gets cut is all of that stuff that is easy to cut because it's not delivering value.
Right.
Right. And so that's where I've seen leaders not really commit to changing the way of working, to deeply embed it into actually how they make their money on a day in, day out basis.
Right. Yeah, we were talking to this gentleman the other day, Steve Dennis, and he's talking about this idea of risk and that, you have these companies who have been around for a long time, who got big and powerful on one thing, and that brings in all the revenue, and it's just too risky to do these other things, right? And these risks cost money, right? You have to put money behind it. And so then they just don't do it, or they, have a little side group over there that is supposed to do it, but that never works, as we were just discussing. I just think it's so fascinating that the thing that made you so successful in the first place prohibits you from continuing to be successful, right?
Absolutely. It's the innovator's dilemma.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Okay, well, we have to wrap up, but we always like to leave our listeners with something inspiring, like a takeaway or, I don't know, a nugget of something. And so can you leave us with a little gift of inspiration or something to think about?
Oh my gosh.
By the way, I love the butterfly thing. I'm going to steal that and put it in my pocket. I'm going to use it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if this is going to be inspiring, but this is what's in my mind right now. My wife would firmly subscribe to the idea that I'm a stoic. And even so much as she actually bought me one year a little coin that said the obstacle is the path on it, because it really reminded her of how I approach life. So kind of going full circle back to your question about how is it to find yourself in HR, leading an HR team? And I think how it is I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Right. And I really firmly believe that the world puts you in positions with opportunities to grow based upon what you need in that moment. Right. Mm-hmm. And adversity is adversity until you get through it and you learn from it. And so how do I feel right now? I feel like I'm in a cauldron of learning, right? It's amazing to be learning so quickly and so much at the moment. And it's exactly where I need to be. Could I ever have imagined myself taking on this gig, taking on this project, taking on this team? Absolutely not. Am I happy that I'm here right now? Hell yeah. Absolutely.
Yay.
And so this idea that every day we get things thrown at us, and to see that as opportunity and to see that you are exactly where you need to be and to actually work against those things to be able to get through whatever that adversity looks like, because it's all for me about learning and taking the next step and the next step and the next step.
Oh, I got goosies.
Me too. Me too. Yay, you.
Yay. Okay, we're going to roll into career confessions. Here we go. Some of my team want to introduce unlimited PTO at the company, but some of our employees, myself included, are skeptical on the impact it might have on productivity and product delivery. Are there any must-dos or must-avoids when implementing such a drastic new policy to minimize any negative impact it might have on us? Ooh, this is a great question for Patty and Iain and myself. We know a little bit about this.
I mean, I lived through us adopting unlimited PTO at IDEO, and I saw the virtues, and then I saw real problems that it created as well. And so before I maybe go into that, I'd ask the fundamental question, like, what problem are we trying to solve here? Like, actually, what problem are we trying to solve? Like, is it competitiveness, like with other people in your category that you're trying to like win talent from? Is it that you're trying to deal with a feeling of burnout in the organization, and so you want to be able to provide more time for people to be able to like rest and recharge? And so like, if we can't get clear on the fundamental question, because like unlimited PTO is a response to something, and I want to know what that kind of central question is, because there might be different solutions to it.
Yeah,
there might
absolutely.
be very different solutions to the problem. That would be where I start with this. And then, in the same way, I would just maybe add that like all of the downsides that we saw with accrued vacation, you get different downsides with unlimited PTO, and you need to institute different policies and different guardrails so that people don't abuse the system in different ways. And so just be careful about what you're trying to create, I think.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'll let you tell the Netflix PTO because you're the creator.
Well, the problem we were trying to solve at the beginning was to push our concept of freedom and responsibility down to the individual and the individual work group. That was the esoteric reason, right? Which was, look, you figure it out. You're an adult, get your work done. And the second part was, I didn't want a team of people that I managed to be in charge of policing who takes time off and who doesn't, based on some corporate policy that didn't really reflect, back to what you said earlier, the rhythm and the cadence of each organization, right? So again, using our G&A experience, it's like, well, don't take the first week in January off if you're doing year-end close. But Jessica, take it from there, because that was my intention, but Jessica came in afterwards and things had gone a little south.
We didn't have anyone that really abused it. I think that there was a level of responsibility and accountability that people felt. And we certainly judged people on their judgment around things. So if people weren't making good decisions around vacation or other things, that was a conversation, right? And sometimes led to that person not being in the organization anymore.
Yeah.
But I think going back to the question about productivity, once we instituted this, there weren't productivity issues. We were just as productive as we were before. I think people just didn't have to, go into a system and put in that they were taking time off. And, we didn't have to have a team of people in HR managing it. Whenever I get this question, and yesterday I was talking to this company, and this wasn't really about vacation. It was about remote work. They went to fully remote. And then it came up that there was a woman who was always traveling. Like, she was traveling all over Europe, right? And so they were like, this day she's in Greece, this day she's in Spain, this day, and they're like, how's she getting her work done? But she was like one of their top performers. But because of her traveling all over Europe, they started instituting all these rules, right? And they were like, you have to be in front of your screen 8 hours a day, right? And then it went to the managers needed screenshots of the Airbnb receipts, where people,
oh my God.
But, we started to talk about how this had gone sideways, right? And isn't it about results? And like, do you really care that whatever her name was on a train while she was doing her work? Right? No, you don't care. Like, you cared that she got great results. And I think that was what we focused on at Netflix, was like, I don't care how much vacation you take. I care about how the results you get are. And you know what? If you're out 2 months a year, you're probably not going to get great results. Maybe you do, but it goes back to judgment. But then it also goes back to the results that you get and the performer that you are.
Yeah. For us at IDEO, when we instituted, the challenge we had, right, was that because we were a consulting business, it wasn't as simple as you had unlimited PTO. The downside we found was actually you have unlimited PTO asterisk, depending on if your studio leader or manager actually says you can take the time off because we might need you for a project.
Right.
And so it became much more complicated than can you get your work done, because your work was like predicated on the needs of a client.
Right. Very different.
Yeah. And maybe we're all three saying somewhat of the same thing. The thing that I think that over time we forgot to do was spend a bunch of time with the team leaders and managers on how to manage it. My story in my book is, you need to know that the year-end close was 3 weeks late this year because of your stupid time off policy, said the then, head of finance. And I'm like, well, since there isn't a policy, what stupid policy are you referring to? And she said, well, somebody on my team took the first 2 weeks of January off because they'd never had them before. And I'm like, right. Because you're in close. If she wants the first 2 weeks in January off, she needs to choose a different occupation. But this person didn't know how to manage it because she thought that it meant she could never say no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's a good point.
Right. My learning over time was that means you really have to help the people who are managing their direct teams understand and communicate that, here's what we need to get done. Here's the time frame. And also be able to intervene with them and say, by the way, you haven't rested those horses in a year.
Yeah.
nobody's taking time off because the schedule's so tight they can't. And you got to manage that. And the third thing, I guess, that I learned was, man, we just had to do it at the top. So learning to model it at the executive level was so hard. I mean, we just really literally had to have people walk out of meetings because their kid called or something to prove that you had permission to do that. Or, look at somebody's endless vacation slides because they actually went on vacation. So I think it's one of those great things that's like, if you try it and it doesn't work, then you modify it for your organization.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
It's not like one way's the black and white thing. You either have unlimited PTO or you have
PTO.
Yeah. I mean, but I think it's similar to the future of work question around actually what's flexibility mean? It means different things for different organizations.
Exactly.
And so I think too many leaders are looking for
best practices,
inspiration. Best practice. What's the right answer here?
Right.
Yeah. People ask me that all the time. Who's doing it right? I'm like, fucking nobody.
We're all learning and we're all evolving and we're all needing to iterate it as we understand what works best for our company. That's all I'd say to anybody who's engaging in whether or not it's that PTO discussion or the future of work discussion.
Agree.
I agree.
Well, we could talk about this for hours, folks. I mean, really. Ian, it's been so lovely having you. Yeah. I want to stay tuned because I want to, talk to you every few months and check in and see if you're still where you need to be.
Thanks for listening to TruthWorks. This episode was produced and edited by Megan Hayward and Mick Finnegan. Thank you to Kathleen Speckert and the whole Edit Audio team.